for my Bible, and it's up here. So there is one thing that we need to take care of. Before we continue with our service, we have a family that is transferring in. If we can put the slide up. Okay. It is our tradition when someone transfers their membership into Crosswalk Fellowship to introduce them to the congregation. And so before we actually do Randy and Sherry, I wanted to see, well, we'll actually do it. Oh, yeah, okay. Is your wife here? Oh, sorry. That's okay. So let's leave. We'll introduce you guys at another time. We brought your names up. I'm sorry. I thought you were just not sure. Anyway, Ricardo and Leslie, we brought your names for vote the previous couple of, I forget if it was 1 or 2 weeks back, but we want to introduce you. So it's okay. Randy and Sherry are transferring from Middletown Seventh-day Adventist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And so, I'm trying to spot you guys. Are Randy? Is Randy and Sherry here? I don't see them. They're not, right? Okay. Anyway, we'll still just do the traditional reading that we have in accepting them into the church family, and we'll introduce them to you later on at another service, when maybe together with you guys again. So, but we want you to be sure that you see who these people are. Maybe something we need to think about is put the picture there, but still it's better to see the people in real life and welcome them. But anyway, since just to follow our kind of tradition, if you don't mind raising your right hand if you want to welcome Randy and Sherry into our church family. That makes it official for those of you who are guests here. It's like our official way of saying, okay, we're accepting you into the family. Thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. I remember as I was growing up, one of my favorite things was to drive with my parents to my grandma's place. By the way, my grandma is going to be here not next week, but the week after. She's 89. I thought she's 93. I got corrected by my father and my brother. So my counting was off. So anyway, they'll be visiting with us, and I'll be really, really happy to introduce her to you because she loves traveling. And so we'll be very happy to have her here from Bulgaria. But we're going to her place down in South Bulgaria, and we used to live in the northeast part. She lived in the southwest part of Bulgaria. We had to go through this mountain, range, and we had to cross through it, and the road was very curvy. And I just remember, as we were coming down, there was a section there that will almost always has fog in it. I don't know if you have driven through fog, but it's very, very funny because you don't see too far. When I started driving, I realized how hard it was for my dad to drive through that section. And I always wondered, Dad, why don't you drive faster? And it is just because he can't see, you know. You have to adjust your speed to the distance, how far you can see. It wasn't long when I was driving to Grand Junction, Colorado, to the first place where I was going to pastor. And I remember same thing through one of the sections right before I got to Colorado. Right past Colorado, past Golden there was a section again with lots of fog. So much fog that my window was getting really, foggy, and my defogger wasn't working well. It was a car that I had just bought, and it had issues, started having issues with the transmission as I was driving, so I had to stop, remember, in that fog. I opened the hood, filled the transmission oil again, cleaned the windows, and then I thought, I'm going to sleep a little bit. I'm just too tired. So I fell asleep, woke up, cleaned the windows again, and just got going. What I didn't realize and don't remember is that for some reason, I had left the hood open. It wasn't even latched. So I get out on the freeway and I start driving, and it comes up and breaks the windshield of my car. The good thing is that it didn't fall through, but it became like a snowflake, and so I had a hard time looking through like the little section that was still, through where I was still able to see. Drove for about 4 hours like that, got to Grand Junction at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I had to preach my first sermon the next day. I hadn't been to the church. It was an interview over the phone because it was far. And so, you can imagine the pressure I was feeling. And so I remember as I was driving into Grand Junction, those of you who have been there, it was a night when there were no stars, no moon. So I drive in, and it doesn't look like that big of a place. In fact, it doesn't look like much during the night, honestly, if you drive in. I don't know how much it has changed now. Haven't been there for probably about 6 years now. But I would assume it's still the same. So you drive in, and it's like in the fog, you see very little lights, and you wonder, where did I come from? Where am I? I went to bed. And I've shared this story with some of you. I woke up, walked out of the house. I had a house that someone was letting me live in. I walk out of the house in the morning, and it's a beautiful, clear day. And I look ahead of me, and I see that I'm surrounded by mountains. There are kind of a sandy rock mountains on one side, and then I look back, and behind my house is the Colorado National Monument with the red rocks that you see on some of the postcards from Colorado. And I look back, and it is so beautiful. The red rocks around this side, the sandy rocks on the other side. You're like in this little, valley that is just surrounded by this beautiful, mountainous area. And so I remember, as I was thinking about today's message, I could vividly remember later on driving up to the top of the Colorado National Monument, and looking from some places where he had a really nice overview and a kind of a great outlook of the whole area. And I remember just admiring how beautiful the city is. What was the difference between the first time I entered Grand Junction and the time when I went to the top of the mountain? It was my viewpoint. We spoke last week that sometimes when we are down in the valley, it is hard for us to see the bigger picture that God sees from the mountain. But today I want to continue with that idea, because I want to bring up to you the idea that sometimes when we are in the valley, it is not only the challenges that we are struggling to go through that scare us, but it is the limited vision that we have. Isn't that true? See, when I look in my life and I look forward, I wonder, what will my life be in 5 or 10 years? I wonder if my dreams will be achievable by my standards, and I have to adjust my dreams to things that I think are real and achievable. I know that there are times when I pray my prayers and I say, God, I don't want to ask you for too much, but just give me what's realistic for me. I'm wondering sometimes, looking forward, if and how much of everything that I thought possible in life when I was 20 will ever happen. See, because when I'm down in the valley where we all live, not where God is on the mountaintop, my vision is so limited that I cannot see beyond what's my reality. But unless we are able to look from the vision, from the mountaintop, from where God gets His vision, our life will always be small, limited, and discouraging. See, we talk about goals in life, right? And you have heard about, what do we say about goals? What do they have to be? They got to be smart. You probably have heard that as you've done strategic planning at your work, or you listen to, sometimes to people talking about goals. They have to be smart, which means they got to be specific, measurable, achievable, real, and timely. All within what we judge to be our capabilities to be, right? See, they got to be measurable. They got to be specific. We need to know what to do, and it needs to be really doable because we want to be sure that we are able to accomplish the goals. They need to be achievable, which means they have to be within our strength and our capabilities. They need to be realistic, because otherwise there is no point of setting them. They need to be timely, because again, they need to be done within the time frame that we set for ourselves, and usually it's 6 months or a year, or for short-term goals. But I wonder, when God looks at our goals and our plans, if he doesn't kind of chuckle a little bit. And he says, you know what? I have so much more for your life. I have such a greater vision than you can ever imagine. I love the way Paul puts the whole view of heaven and how limited we are in understanding it in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. And it says, however, as it is written, what no eye has seen, and what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. Isn't that the way of God speaking through Apostle Paul and telling us, listen, my outlook of life, my vision for you, for your life is much greater than yours. You know what I have prepared for you, for all those who want to experience eternity with me, as we spoke last week, is beyond what your mind can conceive, beyond what eye has seen, what ear has heard. It is something that even your imagination cannot do justice to. Just keep following me, God says, because when you look from the valley, you will have a hard time living a fulfilled life unless you start looking with the vision that I have from the mountaintop, is what God says to us. So last week, we said that God looks at us and he sees that God looks at us, and he wants us to look up to him and know that he will provide for every challenge that we face. Today, I want us to realize that we can look up to God not only to provide for the challenges that we face, but to draw a picture of the great dreams that he has for us. I want you to think about your life, each and every one of us. If you think hard enough, you will realize that there is a point in your life when God gave you more than you ever dreamed. Because God wants to give us everything he possibly can on this sinful earth to make our lives meaningful and our lives joyful. See, seeing what God's vision is stretches our vision to go beyond our limitations. As individuals, as a church, as people who claim to follow a God who created everything, a God who is bigger and greater than all of us. I want to take you to a Bible story found in Exodus chapter 17. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 17. And we're actually going to start reading from verse 8. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. If you notice here, Moses is sending Joshua. And he's saying, listen, the Amalekites are here to fight us. We're going to do this. Take not all of the men, but how many of the men? He said, some of our men. Go to the Amalekites, and I will stand on top of the mountain with the staff of God in my hands. And then the story continues, verse 10. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. They go with Moses. And as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. And when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Very interesting story. I don't know how many of you have pondered on it, but I want to just ask to bring look for a few insights that we might gain from it. Here are the Amalekites coming to fight Israel. Moses sends Joshua, as we said, to fight. He says, I'm going to be up on the mountain with my staff. And what Moses noticed is that when he raised the staff up and he raised his hands down in the valley where the battle was going on, the Israelites will win. When he brought them down, who will win? The Amalekites. Now I want to ask you, what sense does this make, really? Every time I read this story, I'm like, are you kidding me? Just because somebody's hands are up, you're going to win, and just because somebody's hands are down, nothing will happen? See, I just don't get it. Moses did so much for the Israelites so far. He had experienced so much that he could have just stretched the staff and say, hey, win the battle, and they probably could have won. The problem, though, is that Moses was not supposed to do what he felt like doing, right? But he was supposed to do what God told him to do. And earlier in the chapters we don't read all of these details, but we read that God is the one who sends him out there. And by the way, what is very interesting is that in chapter 17, in the earlier verses 1 through 7 in chapter 17, we're not going to go through it because of time, but if you read it, it is the story when Moses lost his temper, and what did he do with the staff? He hit the rock. Why? Because the Israelites wanted water, and God said, speak to the rock, but he got so mad that he couldn't hold his anger. And as the Israelites were saying, give us water to drink, Moses replied to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? And the people continue to do that. And finally, God comes to him and says, go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go, and I will stand before you, before the rock in Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and people will drink. But then we read that Moses gets so frustrated that he strikes the rock twice instead of once. Right? And God says to Moses, later in the story, you are not going to go into the promised land because you didn't follow my instructions. What didn't make sense to me in verses 8 and on for this battle, Moses holding his hands up, also adds up on what didn't make sense to me in the story of Moses earlier in that chapter. That just because he lost his temper with people who are so stubborn and deserve to for him not to hit the rock, but hit each one of them with that staff, he loses the opportunity to be in the promised land. I've wondered a lot, why did God have to be so strict? Why did God have to limit Moses and prevent him from entering the promised land? But what I know for sure is that God gave Moses a very valuable lesson. That success is not found in what I can do with the staff in my hand. Success is found in trusting in God's leadership. See, it was easy for Moses to say, man, I've done so much with this staff. Let me hit it twice so you get so much water that maybe it will flood all over you. I don't know why he did it. It was just temper. It was one of those moments when he lost his cool. And by the way, you know that the Bible presents Moses as the most meek leader from all? So the most patient and meek leader from all loses his temper once. He pleaded for God hundreds of times for these people, asking him for God not to punish them. And here he loses his temper once, and God says, listen, Moses, you got to learn this lesson. You are not any better than anyone else. The only reason why you are a leader of this nation is because you chose to be available to me when I was searching for someone to do it, and you responded to my invitation, and you listened so far, and you've always followed my counsel. But today, you chose to, that you know better how to lead these people. You chose to follow your own counsel, so now I'm going to take something away from you, just to remind every leader that will come after you that it is not about you, about your abilities, about your great miracles that you think you can do because I've given you the power to do so, but it is about you always humbly following my leadership. See, we don't have to understand why God chose that water that the proper thing was to hit the rock only once. We don't know why God chose the proper thing will be for Moses' hands and the staff to be up for the Israelites to win. What we do know is that was what God said needs to happen. And unless his people followed it, they thought they were running down the road where they were living out of the philosophy that what I do is better, what I know to do is better than what God wants me to do. Matthew chapter 20, verse 16, by the way, Jesus kind of reminded the disciples the same lesson. They had forgotten the lesson from Moses. And so Matthew 20, 16, as Jesus spoke to his disciples, he said, the last will be first, and the first will be last. You know, this didn't just mean that those who really want to be ahead, those who want to be first, who wanted the best, to take the best place, like the Pharisees, will be humbled and put at the end of the line to heaven. What this text really means is that for God, who is first and last, really doesn't matter. Because the one on the front is as good as the one in the back. The only reason they're in the front and they're leaders is just because God chose to make them the leader. And not only that, but God chose to give them the abilities to lead. Sometimes we say, oh, this person is a great leader. They have these abilities. It's not because of their qualities that they become a leader, at least in a church and spiritual setting. At least it shouldn't be. And every time a leader becomes a leader in a church setting because they think that they have great qualities and greater vision than anyone, God humbles them down. Because 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 11 tells us that God does not need our abilities. He will provide those. All these, this is a passage talking about spiritual gifts, the gifts that God gives to his people to be able to carry the ministry and fulfill the mission that he has left to the church. As Paul speaks, he says, all these gifts are the work of the one and the same Spirit. And he distributes them how? To each one, just as he determines, or the Greek word could also mean as he wishes. Okay, I want to make Ricardo the leader, I'll do that. Or maybe I want to make Vivian the leader, I will do that. That's how the Spirit works. The only criteria that we see biblically, or one of the main criteria that the Bible tells us the Spirit looks for, is us making ourselves fully available for God to use us. Just because God gives the gift of leadership to some people, and to others hospitality, to some people to be up front, as to others to be, running the things in the background of the ministry of the church and in life, does not mean that one of them is more important than the other. All it means is that God chose some people to do certain things and other people to do other things, and to Him we are all working together as one body, as 1 Corinthians 12 says, to fulfill the mission of God. So back to the story of Moses. God wanted Moses to know that it is not him that is going to make the people of Israel great. It is not him that is going to lead them into the promised land, but it was going to be God Himself that will fulfill that with or without Moses. Isn't that interesting? Ever felt that you are the only one who can do something? Ever felt like you are the only one who really can make the difference? Just to find out that long after you're gone, people continue to do ministry. And God continues to find others that will step up, that are willing to step up and be used by His hand to fulfill His mission. None of us is irreplaceable. See the vision of God, now putting it in perspective. The vision that God has for the future has nothing to do with my abilities, but has everything to do with my availability, as we like saying at church. So God can utilize me in His greater plan for His mission and ministry. And by the way, what is God's plan, God's mission? Matthew 28. Go make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything that I have commanded you, and baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I will be with you until the end of the age. That is the mission of God. God says you go and you continue to share the gospel. See, we have the same mission today as a church. A few weeks ago, we had a meeting with our leaders, with all the ministry leaders of the church and the board members and elders, and we talked about the vision and mission of going forward. And we talked about some of the statistics, and it is so interesting, because when we look at our community in Dallas, we realize that it is growing at a great rate. The population change just in one zip code, okay, here in the Plano area, has grown from with about 35,000 people within 5 years, okay? The projected population growth will be to add another 30,000 in the next 5 years. The population in Frisco, however, has grown with almost 50,000 people over the last 5 years, which is greater than the national average, okay, with about 4%. The national average of population growth is 4. The growth here is 7 to 9%. In fact, the Dallas area, Dallas and Austin, are among the 4 fastest growing cities in the nation. So I look at those statistics, and not to really bog you with numbers, but we looked at detailed statistics in the Dallas area, and then we thought about our church that's aiming to reach out to this area. And how I felt? Like a little ant in the valley looking at reaching, a population area of over probably 400,000 to 500,000 people, just in our 5-mile radius here from this church. Or maybe a bit outer, a bit more, probably about 7 to 10 mile radius. But over 500,000 people for us to reach. And I'm not going to bother with other churches. Yes, there are more churches that will try to reach, but what statistics tell us, that we have this target community around us, and this is what it looks like. The target community's average age is 37 to 39, okay? They're professional people, highly educated. Most of them hold graduate degrees, some type of a graduate degree. Average income is from 95 to 115,000, in some areas even a little bit more, provided that in many homes only one parent is working. But here is what really surprised me about this picture of the community around us. That 80% of people have been exposed to Christianity. That's high, isn't it? But look at the way it breaks down. 60% only claim to be active Christians, and out of them, 30% claim to be somewhat active, which really means they go to church at Christmas, Easter, and maybe one or two more times. To be somewhat active means you go to church no more than once a month. So out of that 60%, 30% are not extremely active. But look at the next number. Over between 30 to 33%, depending on the different zip codes, are people who don't go to church. They either are non-believers, they have other faith, or they are inactive Christians. They just have broken away from the church, period. 30%. It might not seem like a big number to you, but when you consider the numbers, that's a lot. That's close to over 150,000 people in this area right here don't claim any church as their home. Is there a field for us to reach? If we look in the overall population of Texas, the population of Texas is projected to grow with 1.5 million over the next 5 years. How much will the church grow during that time? And I'm talking overall, the churches, the growth of all the believers, all the Christian churches. Are we even making a dent in this, in reaching these new people? I look at these statistics and my heart is telling me, God, we can't even set our goal as we have so far to reach this 30% of the people, to minister among them. You know, it's too big of a challenge for us. How many people are we here? On average, about 120, 30 is the average attendance at the moment. And so how can 120, 30 people challenge this 30% of the population? And if we take all the churches together, we still are not enough to make a difference. But looking down from the valley, up towards towards the challenge ahead of us, we feel like we are very limited. But the way we are supposed to look at this picture is not down from the valley, but to climb with God on the mountaintop. Because when we go to the mountaintop, God said, you know how many people I had joined the church in one day during the time of the disciples started this church? 3,000, 2,000. Multitudes of people were just flocking into the church. When was last time you saw 3,000 people getting baptized? Even during communism, when communism broke out, right after communism fell down and the church was really expanding, we'll put 50 posters, we'll get close to 1,000 people to a meeting hall. And more than we could, the meeting hall could actually hold there. Even then, we didn't have that many people being baptized. Could it be that God, through this story, is telling us, just like Moses was going to look down at this battle and say, well, God, I hope you help us win. But he realized how much God can do if he just raised his hands up. So I want you to look at this challenge we're facing ahead of us of reaching over 150,000 non-church people in this area, or inactive Christians in this area, and not worry about how you're going to do it, but just do what I have told you to do. See the lesson in the story of Moses that came from his hands having to be lifted up to a point that Aaron had to go with her and hold Moses' hands up. The lesson in that is a kind of a double lesson. Number one, when God tells you to do something because he's going to accomplish a great thing that you by yourself cannot accomplish, just do the little things that he has told you to do. Isn't that true? God tells us, you know what? I just want you to live a lifestyle of reaching out to people, sharing my love. Don't worry about how many people you're going to impact out of this 150,000. When God says, hey, reach out to your neighbor, don't worry about the city of Dallas at this point, Just do whatever I call you to do. And let me worry about the rest. God knows what He is doing, doesn't He? Moses didn't have to go and recruit more soldiers. He didn't have to go and train his army more. All he had to do is the simple things. Moses, raise your hand and your staff. The battle was going well. The moment you stop doing the simple things, what happens? You start losing. And finally, they had to say, well, we don't get it why, but all we know is that every time we do the simple things that God has told us to do, God is going to do great things. So the first question for us today is, are you ready to do the simple things that God has called us to do? Are you ready to do whatever God challenges you with? And the second lesson is once again in that symbolic stretching of hands up, because God wanted Moses and the Israelites to know that the only way possible for us to win any battle or reach any goals is if we are connected with Him. When our hand meets God's hands, we can see the great vision of God being accomplished, and God wants us to reach all the world. How? He's going to bring the details. What we need to do is be available in His hands to do His mission and ministry. So in 2016, we have had some great things happen in our church during the past years. We did a survey last year. I don't know how many of you remember that. And the feedback we got from that and from a session we had with feedback about the church, there were a few things that came that we were very blessed with. We are very strong with kids programs. We are a very welcoming, and you are a very welcoming and loving church. I guess we are. I'll include myself. We are a very welcoming and accepting and loving church. We are a very diverse church at that time, with over 32 ethnic groups represented here, not nationalities per se, but ethnic groups. And we also have 57% of our attendees involved in some type of ministry. There were also comments about the worship service connecting with people that people said they brought to church and so on. But there are some great things that have happened here. But we also have our challenges, right? Because I look at the statistics and I look at how much are we really growing per year. And not looking at the numbers, but the numbers somehow also reflect what we expect to see. And so I started thinking about that, and I started thinking, is 57% of involvement from our attendance and membership, not only members, but the whole attendance here, is 57% of people being involved in ministry enough for God to really do what He has said He will do? And I have to say that it probably is, because Jesus said, if you remember, that even if we stop talking, who's going to start speaking? The stones. God says, you know what? I don't really need you for this, but it'll be much easier for me to use you rather than stones. So would you be willing to join me in fulfilling this mission that I have for this church? So with our limitations and weaknesses that we talked about, and I'll share with you some of them, we need a facility that will be available to us to be able to do ministry throughout the whole week. It's very hard when we are limited just to Thursday night and Saturday between 8 to 4 to use facilities, and everything else seems to be very expensive around. We need more people to be involved with time and finances, helping to lead ministries. The reason is because a growing church cannot be serviced by 57% of who is here. In a big church, you can get by with 20 or 30% of people doing all the work. But in a growing congregation, in a smaller growing congregation, you cannot. So we need every one of you to be involved. And so what we have talked about is that on January 30th, beginning of the last Saturday of January of next year, we're going to have a special ministry fair. We're going to have all the ministry leaders here present every single ministry we have as a church, and we want to give you an opportunity to join and get involved in one of these ministries. We're going to have the leaders here. We're going to have every ministry have a little display that tells you about what they do, provide an opportunity for you to go and talk to the ministry leaders, because we have a mission that we have adopted to fulfill. And the mission is, we want to be a mission or outreach, outward-looking community of people living to have a genuine experience with a loving God in a fresh way, deepening our biblical knowledge of Him and sharing His story with others, which really translates in what's on the next slide in one word. We are a church that we want to connect people with Jesus. We are a church that wants to connect people with Jesus. That includes us as well. So here is, let's go to the next slide. Here is a little graph of what we're looking at. The main word there is the word connect. So for 2016 and for our mission, we have chosen the word connect to represent our overall mission. We want to connect with God by having a genuine experience with Him. We want to connect with each other by providing a loving environment. If we don't connect with each other and we're not a loving community, we're going to have a hard time reaching out to others. By the way, one of the weaknesses that I did not mention that came through those surveys and reflections was that our church is friendly to get in, but people feel like it is hard to build close relationships. And I'm willing to be very open about that. And I know that there are reasons. We live in different parts of the city. The majority of us have kids. It is hard to take time when we meet only here once a week to really build more relationships. But we need to find better ways to connect with each other. And we're going to keep bringing more details about what some plans are from the different ministries to do that. But again, connect with God, connect with each other, and connect with the community, because that's what our mission is. Disciple people who don't know Jesus to come into the church. So you will hear this word a lot, connect or connecting. Just remember, our goal is to have each and every one of us connect with God so we can run and do God's mission. Connect with each other so God can use us better as a community. We can reflect His love in a better way, and connect with the community because God wants us to make a difference in the life of others. Otherwise, there is no point of us just huddling together. Our vision, quickly, that we talked about is to continue to lead people to experience Jesus. And the longer statement we kind of edited from the previous statement we had says to serve Frisco and its surrounding communities. And for those of you who haven't been at any of our visioning meetings, I want to let you know our target area here for our church is primarily focused on Frisco, Plano, the west side of McKinney, the Colony, the west side, the east side of Carrollton, and also Little Elm. That's kind of the surrounding area that we are looking at. So we want to serve the Frisco and the surrounding communities by helping people experience the love of Jesus and grow into a saving relationship with Him. There is nothing more important than that, than bringing people closer to Jesus. The way we want to fulfill that, I'm not going to bother you with this too much today. Just wanted to show it to you. We're going to keep coming back in January as we talk about the more extended plans for next year. But our objectives are to connect, as you see, with God, community, and each other. In each one of these areas, the 5 areas we have there, the objectives that we have there are somehow connected with more than just one of God, community, and each other. Relevant creative worship helps us connect with God, helps us connect with each other, and hopefully helps us connect with the community, but primarily connects us with God. Building disciples helps us connect with God. We are helping people get closer to God. Need-based programs, events, and services offered to enrich personal, professional, spiritual, and family values in all age groups in the community helps us connect with the community. Lifestyle of friendship evangelism helps us connect with the community and with each other as we go out and we try to share the good news of the gospel with others, we're connecting with each other as well. And finally, recreational programs, which are helping us to connect with the community and with each other as well. Those are the 5 areas that we're going to look into further. I wanted at the end to share with you the 5 goals that we have for this next year. Looking forward into 2016. And again, we try to make them measurable. We try to make them smart, right? But we're hoping that they are pushing us at least a little bit out of our comfort zone, because otherwise they will not reflect God's vision. So here it is. Discipleship. We want to disciple every, and I'm emphasizing the word every, member or attendee of this congregation to become strongly connected with God. We want to challenge every person to move a step closer to God. Not just some of us, but every single person that is here. It is going to be a challenge, because we don't, Satan finds way to distract us, but we want to be sure that we provide and facilitate this discipleship growth process. We want to have growth groups, at least 3 opportunities of either a small group or an interest group that meets on one time or over a period of few weeks. At least 3 opportunities that you can attend every quarter for people to engage in these interest small groups. Because once again, we want us to be able to grow spiritually in those groups, to grow with each other, and to provide opportunities for us to bring friends to those groups. We also want to focus on in ministry, we want to involve at least 80% of members on one of our ministry teams here in the church. We are not that many. And unless you're involved in active ministry, Satan will find ways to discourage you and me from really holding on to him strongly. Now, this is a number that is a stretch, I'll tell you that. Most churches say, well, it's the 20-80 principles. 20 people are only a part of the ministries and serve the rest of the 80%. We've always beaten that statistic, but I would like us to jump beyond the 60% we've been at. Let us go to 80% of us being members of, being a part of a ministry team in church. And also, we want to challenge every single one of us, again, of the members, the committed members here, to be actively involved in outreach ministry. How? Through mission. The next point, we want to challenge 100% of our members to live a daily lifestyle of evangelism. What that means is that wherever you are at, you are doing evangelism. Not only when you open your Bible and you do Bible studies, but when you walk out the doors of this place. When you wake up, in fact, you are doing evangelism to your family. When you walk out of your church, you're doing evangelism to the people outside that God brings your way. Let's 100% of us be committed during the new year. Is our goal to live a lifestyle of evangelism, of constantly sharing the love of Jesus with others. And finally, we want to look into facility. We want to acquire at least the land for a multi-purpose ministry center that we can use 24/7 for ministry and for God. Now, we can look at that, and we might think, well, is this possible to achieve? I want you to think not about the goals we have set, but what God can do through those goals. Because this is not about 80% of us being involved in ministry or 100% statistic that we are all living a lifestyle of evangelism, but it is that through those numbers, God will take each and every one of us, and He will do the miracle of reaching those over 150,000 people in this community. We might not reach everyone. By the way, Moses, as we said, didn't go into the promised land, right? Some of us are not going to see the big numbers of what God will bring into the church. Some of us might not be the people who are going to be the instruments in bringing those numbers, at the end, to see them coming in and getting baptized and giving their life to God, but we'll be a part of that, because if it wasn't for Moses, for him being available for God to use him and his leadership, there would have no been Joshua. There wouldn't have been a promised land. God would have used somebody else, but unless God uses available people, unless this preliminary work is done, even by those who don't go into the promised land, there is no life in the promised land. So here is my challenge. When you look at your limitations in at the valley we're in, and you feel like, well, I don't have the qualities to really make a difference, just do this. Use the gifts that God has given you to do just whatever God has called you to do, as little as it might be. And God will take it and win the battle of this final mission, spreading of the gospel that He envisions, where the gospel will reach the whole world, not just the Dallas area. So don't be limited by your abilities. Just give all of you to Jesus. Today we're going to have a spiritual gift seminar, and we'll offer that again next year, early in the first quarter of next year. If you don't know what your spiritual gifts come, we'll lead you through a process where you can discover your passion, God-given passion, spiritual gifts. How can you fit your personality into ministry? Where is the best place for you to serve? But do something with what God has given you. First challenge. The second challenge, I want you and I to commit that we're going to live a 100% lives committed in Jesus. This whole year, our theme has been in living an all-in life in Jesus. Are you committed 100%? Because God cannot use us unless we give 100% of who we are. Because when we do that, He takes us from the valley, lifts us to the mountaintop, and He allows us to see His big vision that is a lot clearer when you are up there with Him. So my third and final challenge is, let God show you His vision. We believe God wants to do great things through this congregation, through each and every one of us, by helping us connect with Him, stay connected with each other, and connect the community with Him as well. Would you join us in 2016? This is my prayer and my goal. Amen.